My brother lifted his beer and smiled at the table like he was about to say something generous. Instead, he looked right at me and said, "You know what your problem is, Maya? You care too much about your little career and not enough about finding a man who can actually take care of you." Everyone laughed. My mother covered her mouth like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all year. My father nodded slowly, the way he does when he agrees, but doesn't want to say it out loud. I felt my fork go still in my hand. I had spent the last 4 years wiring money to that table, keeping the lights on, covering the mortgage gap, paying down the credit card my mother swore she'd stop using. And my brother, who hadn't held a steady job in 2 years, was telling me I needed a man to take care of me. I set my fork down. I looked at him and said, "That's interesting, Marcus. Who's been taking care of you?" The table went quiet so fast it felt like a power outage, but that silence wasn't the end of anything. It was the starting gun. Before I tell you what happened after that dinner, tell me where you're listening from, because I need to know I'm not the only woman who's ever sat at a family table and felt like a stranger in her own story. My name is Maya Calloway. I'm 31 years old. I work in healthcare administration in Denver, Colorado, and from the outside, I look like someone who has it together. Clean apartment near Cheeseman Park. A job with benefits. Savings I built from nothing. But for most of my adult life, roughly half of what I earned quietly disappeared into my family's hands before I ever got to feel it as mine. My mother, Diane, stopped working full-time after my younger brother was born. She'd been a dental hygienist, but she told everyone she retired early. The truth was closer to this. She preferred not to, and my father, Glenn, let it slide because it was easier than the argument. My father drove trucks for 20 years and then hurt his back badly enough that the doctor put him on partial disability. The disability checks covered maybe 60% of their bills. The rest became a conversation they had with me. And then there's Marcus. My brother is 28 years old. He has a girlfriend named Tess who works at a salon, and together they rent a room in my parents' house for what I was told was a little something toward utilities. He spent 3 semesters at community college, dropped out, picked up some gig work, lost interest, and somewhere along the way decided that the universe owed him a longer runway. He calls himself an entrepreneur. What that has meant, in practice, is that I've paid for at least 4 of his ideas, including a pressure washing business that lasted 6 weeks and a dropshipping venture that generated exactly 0 sales. I used to tell myself that helping was the right thing. That family is family. That one day they would see what I was doing and feel something close to gratitude. I told myself that story for 4 years. I kept telling it even as my own savings account stayed flat, even as I skipped the work conference in Nashville because I couldn't afford the hotel, even as I watched Marcus post videos from a cabin weekend that I had indirectly funded through what he called a short-term loan. Every other Sunday, I drive 40 minutes south to my parents' house in Lakewood for dinner. My mother makes the same things every time: pot roast, green beans from a can, store-bought rolls warmed in the oven. The house smells like dryer sheets and carpet that needs replacing. There are photos everywhere. Marcus at his high school graduation, wide grin, cap slightly crooked. Marcus at a family reunion, front and center. My parents on their anniversary trip to Branson. I am in some of those photos too, usually at the edge, slightly turned as though the camera caught me mid-exit. I bring dessert. I do the dishes. I ask about my father's back and my mother's book club and whatever Tess has been up to. They tell me about Marcus's latest idea, about how he just needs the right opportunity, about how things are tight right now and they're not sure how they're going to handle the property tax bill this quarter. I smile and I say the right things, and I drive home on the highway at night, wondering why I feel emptier leaving than I did arriving. That particular Sunday, I noticed something in the air before I even took off my coat. My mother was moving too quickly, talking too much about nothing. My father kept glancing at Marcus like they had rehearsed something. Marcus himself was in a good mood, which is usually a signal, the way a sunny day in February in Colorado can mean a storm is 2 hours out. We sat down. The pot roast was dry. Marcus poured himself a generous glass of wine, the bottle I had brought, and started talking about a friend of his who had just gotten a job in sales and was already pulling 6 figures. He said it the way people say things when they want you to feel like you're behind. My mother asked me if I was seeing anyone. I said no. She made a small sound in her throat. My father looked at his plate. Then Marcus leaned back the way he does when he's about to perform and said it, that I cared too much about my career and not enough about finding a man who could take care of me. And everyone laughed. I felt the specific heat that starts in your chest and rises slowly to your jaw. I knew that heat. I had swallowed it down so many times over so many dinners that I could have mapped its exact route through my body. But this time, something was different. Something had already been shifting in me for weeks, and that laugh was the last ounce of weight on a floor that had been weakening for a long time. I set my fork down and I asked him who had been taking care of him. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the kind of silence where everyone is deciding simultaneously whether to laugh it off or let it land. My mother started to say something with a soft voice, the smoothing over voice, but I wasn't finished. I said calmly that I was genuinely curious, because from where I was sitting, I had sent money to this house 11 times in the last 14 months. I had covered the gap on the mortgage payment twice. I had paid off the Visa card in March because my mother had called me crying. I had given Marcus $1,800 in August for the business that no longer existed. So I wanted to understand who exactly was being taken care of by whom at this table. No one laughed this time. Marcus's jaw tightened. He said I was being dramatic. My mother said I was embarrassing myself. My father said quietly that this wasn't the time or place. I picked my fork back up and finished eating. I said very evenly that I agreed. It wasn't the time or the place, but there would be one. I drove home that night with both hands on the wheel and something cold and clear settling in my chest. Not rage. I had moved through rage already, somewhere between the highway exit and the first red light. What I felt instead was decision. Quiet and irreversible, like a key turning in a lock. I got home and I did something I had been avoiding for longer than I could honestly explain. I opened a spreadsheet, not a budget, not a projection, a record. I went through my bank statements going back 4 years, and I pulled every transfer, every Venmo, every Zelle, every check I had deposited into their account. I sorted it by recipient. I added it up. When the total appeared on the screen, I sat with it for a long time. $43,260. I was 31 years old. I had a retirement account that should have been twice the size it was. I had put off getting my own car serviced for 8 months because the timing always felt bad. I had never taken a real vacation. And I had quietly, incrementally, given $43,000 to people who had just laughed at me for not having a husband. I didn't cry. I opened a second tab, and I started reading about how to set up a trust block on recurring bank transfers. The call started 3 days later, when the automatic transfer I had been running to my parents' account didn't go through. My mother first, voice tight, asking if everything was okay with my bank. Then my father, shorter, asking me to call him. Then Marcus, casual, asking if I could spot him $400 because something had come up with the car. I read the messages and I put my phone screen down on my desk and I went back to work. By the following week, the casual messages had shifted into something with more pressure in them. My mother said the mortgage company had called. My father said this wasn't something I could just decide without talking to the family. Marcus sent a long message that started with, "Look, I know things have been weird," and ended with a detailed explanation of why he specifically needed money right now and why I was the only person who could help. I saved every message, every single one, screenshots with timestamps, organized into a folder on my phone. I had started doing this not out of anger, but out of a quieter instinct, the feeling you get when you sense that a situation is about to require documentation. That instinct turned out to be right. The Sunday after the stop transfers, I got a message from my mother that said simply, "Come to dinner. We need to sort this out as a family." Not a question, not an invitation, a summons. I thought about not going. I sat with that option for 2 full days. And then I decided that if there was going to be a conversation, I was going to be the one who chose what it covered. I drove to Lakewood on a cold, gray Sunday, and I felt nothing like the woman who usually made that drive rehearsing how to keep the peace. I felt entirely still. I had a folder on the passenger seat. I had made 2 phone calls earlier that week, one to my bank and one to a woman named Andrea, a family law and civil attorney whose number I had found through my coworker Priya, who had gone through her own version of this 2 years earlier. Priya had said, "Document everything before you say anything. Then say it once, clearly." I had done exactly that. The house looked the same from the outside. The dead plant on the porch my mother had been meaning to replace for 3 years. The side gate that never latched right. I had paid for the gate latch repair, and they had never installed it. I noticed that now in a way I hadn't before. Inside, the tension was sitting at the table before I was. My mother was arranging things that didn't need arranging. My father stood near the kitchen counter with his arms crossed. Not angry exactly, but positioned like a man who had prepared an argument. Marcus was on the couch with the TV on, which was his version of pretending not to care. My mother started before I had even sat down. She said the mortgage was 17 days late and that they needed me to understand what that meant for the family. She said she didn't know what had gotten into me, but that I was putting everyone in a very difficult position. She said it the way she has always said hard things, like she is reporting a natural disaster that no one is responsible for. I sat down. I put the folder on the table. I said I understood the mortgage was late. I said I also understood that I had been covering the gap on that mortgage for 22 of the last 48 months, and I asked, genuinely, what the plan had been for the other 26 months and what the plan was going forward. My father said the plan was that I was their daughter and families help each other. I said I agreed. I asked when Marcus's contributions to the household were scheduled to increase. Marcus came in from the living room then, drawn by the sound of his name. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed like he was mirroring our father, and he said I had a lot of nerve coming in here acting like I was better than everyone just because I had a decent job. I looked at him for a moment. I said I didn't think I was better than anyone. I said I thought I had been clearer than I realized about where my money was going, and less clear than I should have been about the conditions attached. Then I opened the folder. I had printed 3 copies of the same document, 4 years of transfers organized by date and recipient with a typed summary at the top. Total outgoing. Breakdown by category. My name, their names, my account, their accounts. Clean and readable the way I format reports at work. I put 1 copy in front of my mother, 1 in front of my father, and I set the 3rd one aside. My mother looked at the paper and looked away. My father picked it up, and his expression shifted in a way I hadn't seen before, something uncertain moving behind his eyes. Marcus said, "Are you serious right now? You made a spreadsheet?" I said I had made a record, and then I said there was something else in the folder I needed them to see. I pulled out a letter. It was from my bank, confirming that a request had been made 3 weeks ago to add a secondary authorized user to my emergency line of credit. The request had included what appeared to be my signature. I had not made that request. The room changed. My father set down the paper he was holding. My mother's hand went to her collarbone, which she does when she's afraid. I said I had spent some time with Andrea, and that Andrea had confirmed that what I was looking at was an unauthorized use of my identity and credit. I said I had not yet decided what I wanted to do with that information. I said the decision would depend significantly on what happened in the next 30 days. Marcus said I was being insane. His voice had gone higher and faster the way it does when he is scared and covering it with volume. He said I couldn't just come in here throwing around words like unauthorized and identity when this was his own family. I said I knew it was my family. I said that was exactly why it hurt as much as it did. My father said, very quietly, that he hadn't thought I would actually find out. He said they had planned to handle it quietly, to pay it back before I noticed. He said the property tax bill had been more than they expected, and they had panicked. My mother started to cry. The soft kind, the kind I had seen so many times that I knew exactly how it moved, when the tears arrived and when the voice would start to shake. I had spent years responding to that crying by reaching for my checkbook. I sat with it this time without moving. I said that I heard them. I said I believed that they had been afraid, and that fear made people do things they wouldn't do otherwise. I said I also needed them to understand that what had been done was not a small thing, and that going forward, I needed something concrete to change, not a promise, something structural. I told him what that looked like. My name removed from every account and credit instrument that wasn't mine within 30 days. A written acknowledgement of the unauthorized access, signed and dated. A realistic conversation about the house, about whether it was sustainable for them to stay in it, because I was not going to continue to be the ceiling holding up a structure that needed a different foundation. My father looked older than I had ever seen him look. He said, "Maya, rue your parents." I said, "I know, and I love you. But love doesn't mean I have no limits. It means I'm telling you clearly where they are instead of disappearing without a word." Marcus left the room. I heard the back door open and close. My mother wiped her eyes and said she didn't know how things had gotten to this point. I said I thought we both knew, if we were being honest. She didn't argue with that. That was the most honest moment we had ever had at that table. I left an hour later. I drove home in the dark with the heat on and the radio off, and I felt something I hadn't felt in the car after a Sunday dinner in years. I felt like I had taken up exactly the amount of space I was supposed to take up. Not apologetic space, not careful space, just mine. Andrea called me 11 days later. The bank had completed their review. The unauthorized access was confirmed. My name had been removed from the line of credit because I had chosen not to file a formal complaint. No criminal referral had been made, but the record existed, and Andrea had made sure I understood exactly what that meant for any future situation. I stood at my kitchen window with the phone warm in my hand, and I looked out at the street below, and I thought about all the Sunday dinners, all the pot roast and the canned green beans and the photos on the wall where I was always slightly out of frame. I thought about all the transfers, all the mornings I woke up and checked my balance and felt the quiet dread of watching my own life thin out at the edges. I thought about my brother's face when I put the folder on the table, that flicker of something under the performance, something that looked almost like shame. I wasn't happy about any of it. I want to be clear about that. There is no version of this story where I felt triumphant. What I felt was the specific, tender relief of someone who has been holding their breath for 4 years and finally exhaled. I still talk to my mother. Not every week, but sometimes. The conversations are different now, shorter and more honest, which turns out to be better than long and careful. She told me last month that they are looking at a smaller place in Aurora, something they can actually manage on their own income. She said it like she was apologizing. I told her I thought it sounded like a good plan. I haven't spoken to Marcus since that Sunday. I don't know if that's permanent. I'm leaving that door at whatever angle it ends up at without forcing it either way. Some things need time before you know what they are. What I know is this. I put my name on a budget for the first time in 4 years that was only mine. My retirement contributions went up by $400 a month. I booked a long weekend in Sedona that I had been looking at for 2 years, and I went alone, and I hiked 6 miles on a Tuesday morning, and I sat on a red rock ledge, and I felt exactly as whole as I was. I learned something that I want to say carefully because I don't think it's simple. Generosity is not the same thing as sacrifice. You can give from a place of genuine love, and that is a beautiful thing. But when you give from fear, from the pressure of being needed, from the guilt of being the one who can while others say they can't, that is not generosity. That is a slow leak in the bottom of your own life, and you don't notice it until one night you sit down and add up the numbers and realize the floor is nearly gone. If you have ever been the person at the table who keeps the lights on and gets laughed at anyway, I want to hear from you. Tell me where you're listening from and what it cost you to finally put the fork down. And if this story found you at the right moment, subscribe, because there is more where this came from.